My name is Evelyn, and for over 30 years, I dedicated myself to building a life with my husband, Thomas. We met when I was just starting my career as a nurse, fresh out of school, working late shifts in the ER. He was a young lawyer just starting out with more dreams than money. We made it work. We had our share of struggles. Money was tight, our apartment was small, and there were days I thought the weight of it all might crush us, but we made it through. Thomas and I were partners. I believed that. I believed in us. I worked 60-hour weeks, while Thomas worked even longer hours in his small law firm, often taking on cases that barely paid. But we believed in the future we were building together. I sacrificed my time, my energy, my comfort to make sure we had what we needed. When Thomas was struggling, I picked up extra shifts at the hospital to make ends meet. We celebrated the small victories. His first promotion, our first house, the kids we raised. There was never a question in my mind about what we had built. But somewhere along the way the world started to shift. We had children, 2 beautiful kids, Marcus and Jasmine, and suddenly the house we built was too quiet. It wasn't just the sound of the kids growing up and leaving the nest. It was something deeper, something harder to explain. It was as if the space between Thomas and me had started to widen, slowly at first, but then more rapidly until I could no longer ignore it. The late nights became more frequent. Thomas started working later, claiming he was caught up in a particularly big case, but I knew that was a lie. I knew when my husband was in the office late, and when he wasn't. The phone calls became more secretive. He changed his passwords. He started buying new clothes, more expensive cologne, and I began to wonder who he was trying to impress. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off as nothing. "I'm just trying to stay young, Evelyn," he'd say. You know, trying to keep up with the times. But I knew better. I knew that when a man starts trying too hard to impress others, it's usually because he's hiding something. I noticed it more and more. There were the small things, the tiny cracks that I chose to ignore. He stopped being the man I had fallen in love with. Instead of talking to me about his day, about our family, he was distant. He became a stranger in our own home. His work was his excuse, and his phone was his refuge. He would guard it like it was a lifeline, taking it with him into the bathroom, refusing to leave it out of sight. I tried not to let it bother me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. It wasn't until one night when I was going through our shared phone bill that I saw it. Name. Number. Clara. The name rang a bell. I'd heard it before. It was the same name that had popped up on Thomas's phone, hidden in the depths of his contact list. But this time it wasn't just a casual message. This was different. The name was marked with a heart emoji. I stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it was just some work colleague, someone he was close to. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew it wasn't true. I'd heard the change in his tone when he spoke about her. He'd become more protective of his phone, more guarded when I asked questions. I wasn't naive. I knew this was the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. For 3 weeks I watched him. I watched as he came home late, smelling of unfamiliar cologne. His clothes crumpled like he had been in a hurry. I watched as he became more distant. His gaze often fixed on something far away, as if he was somewhere else. And every time I tried to talk to him about it, about what I had seen, he would deflect. "You're imagining things, Evelyn," he'd say. "I'm just tired. Work has been overwhelming." But I knew something had shifted, and it wasn't just work. I had never been one to let my emotions get the best of me. As a nurse, I had spent my entire career learning how to handle high-stress situations, how to stay calm in the face of chaos. But this was different. This was my life, my family, my marriage. This was the man I had built a life with, the man I had trusted, and he was slipping away from me, one lie at a time. So, after weeks of doubt, fear, and sleepless nights, I decided to do something about it. I couldn't just sit there and let this happen. I was done being in the dark. I was done being the woman who was too afraid to confront the truth. I made the decision. I would confront him. I would find out exactly what was going on. I would look Clara in the eyes and see for myself what it was that she had that I didn't. It wasn't easy. I spent nights pacing back and forth, wondering if I was making a mistake, wondering if I was about to destroy my family. But the truth was, I already knew it was too late. My family had already been destroyed. This wasn't about saving what we had left. It was about confronting the truth, no matter how painful. So, on a Tuesday afternoon, I found myself standing outside a hospital room, room 315, my hand trembling as I reached for the door handle. The hallway was eerily quiet, the sterile white walls reflecting a cold, unforgiving light. It felt like I was walking down a hallway toward my own execution, each step heavier than the last. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. I had imagined walking in, confronting Clara, demanding answers. I had imagined keeping my composure, staying calm, showing them both that I was in control. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. When I pushed open that door, I saw Thomas, my husband, the man who had promised me everything. He was sitting next to Clara, feeding her a spoonful of applesauce. But it wasn't just the applesauce that caught my attention. It was the tenderness in his eyes, the care with which he dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. The way he leaned in, whispered something to her and smiled, the smile I used to get when I was sick and needed him. He wasn't just feeding her applesauce. He was feeding her the love he had once shown me. And then I saw it. His watch. The anniversary watch I had given him last year. The one I had saved for months to buy him. I remembered the smile on his face when I handed it to him. "Forever yours," the inscription read. But now, he was wearing it while feeding another woman. I stood frozen in the doorway, my eyes locked on Thomas. The room around me seemed to fade away as I took in the scene before me. My husband, the man I had given my entire heart to, was sitting next to another woman, holding her hand, feeding her, tending to her like she was his everything. And in that moment, I realized just how much I had been deceived. The bag slipped from my hands, crashing onto the floor with a thud. The sound echoed through the room, louder than I had ever imagined. It felt like the universe had just shifted beneath me. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, as if I were suffocating in the weight of the truth. I watched them, Thomas and Clara, completely unaware of me standing there. The tender way he brushed a strand of hair from her face, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. It was all too familiar. It was the same way he used to talk to me. The same look he gave me when we first met, when I was sick, or when we were just sitting together, enjoying the quiet comfort of our home. But now, that tenderness was no longer mine. It was hers. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. How long had this been going on? How could Thomas, my Thomas, do this to me? To our family? I felt a wave of nausea roll through me, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse right there in the doorway. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the betrayal. The man I had spent 30 years with, the man who had once sworn he would love me forever, was now holding another woman in his arms like she was his world. The memories hit me like a flood. The good times, the bad times, the dreams we shared, the promises we made. All of it felt like a lie now. I had spent my life building a family with this man, nurturing our love, raising our children, and trusting that we would grow old together. And here he was, feeding applesauce to Clara like she was the center of his universe, while I stood on the outside, a forgotten memory. But it wasn't just the sight of him with her that shattered me. It was the reality that I had been blind to everything. How had I not seen it? How had I missed the signs? The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the protective nature of his phone. He had been hiding something from me for months, maybe even years. And I had been too trusting, too comfortable in my belief that everything was fine. I had trusted him with my heart, with my life, with the life we had built together. And now I felt like a fool. Thomas's voice finally broke through the silence. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the room. The moment our gazes locked, everything changed. I saw it in his eyes, surprise, guilt, panic. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to find the right words, but none of them came. It was as if he was trying to explain something that couldn't be explained, trying to make sense of the mess he had created. "Evelyn, he started, but his words were cut off by the sudden clatter of my purse hitting the floor. My hands trembled as I backed away, desperate to escape the suffocating reality of what I had just discovered. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't bear to hear the lies that were no doubt coming next. I turned and fled the room, my footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway as I rushed toward the exit. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with a million thoughts, none of them making any sense. The air in the hospital was thick with the scent of antiseptic, and the fluorescent lights above flickered and hummed in an endless drone. It all felt like a dream, a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I didn't stop running until I reached my car in the parking garage. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, the weight of the world pressing down on me. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Tears came then, hot, choking sobs that tore through me, breaking me in ways I didn't know were possible. 30 years. 30 years of marriage, of love, of sacrifice. And he had thrown it all away for Clara. But as I sat there in the dimly lit parking garage, something inside me began to shift. The tears stopped. The shaking subsided. And in that moment I realized something. I wasn't the broken woman I thought I was. I wasn't the victim in this story. I had been living in a lie, but now I was awake. I had seen the truth. And as painful as it was also liberating. I wasn't going to sit here and cry. I wasn't going to let this define me. I was going to fight back. I had given Thomas everything. My time, my love, my trust. And he had betrayed me. But he wasn't going to get away with it. Not without facing the consequences. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything we had without a fight. For 30 years I had been the loving wife, the supportive partner, the mother who always put everyone else first. But now it was time for me to take back control. It was time for me to take care of myself. I wiped the tears from my eyes and started the car. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I felt something else, something stronger than the pain. Felt power. I spent the next few days in a fog. I couldn't look at Thomas without seeing Clara. I couldn't listen to him talk without hearing the lies in every word. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him feeding her applesauce, that smile on his face, the same smile he had once given me when we were first married, when life felt simple and good. But I wasn't going to let myself drown in that image. Couldn't. Had to think. I had to plan. For 32 years, I had been the one to keep everything together. I had cared for Thomas when he was sick. I had supported him through the lean years when his law practice barely paid the bills. I had helped raise our children, kept our home running smoothly, and always put everyone's needs before my own. But now I realized I had been neglecting the most important person in my life. Me. I wasn't going to let Thomas or Clara define who I was. I wasn't going to be the woman who stood idly by while her entire world crumbled. No, I was going to take back control. I didn't know how to confront Thomas yet. I didn't know what to say to him when he came home. I didn't know how to start this conversation without everything falling apart. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. He wasn't going to think he could do this to me and just walk back into our life like nothing had happened. The next morning I didn't go to work. I called in sick, something I had never done in the years I had worked at County General. It felt strange to take the day off, to give myself permission to stop being the caretaker for everyone else. But that's exactly what I needed to do. I needed to take care of myself for once. By the time Thomas came home that evening, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to beg him to come back. I wasn't going to plead with him. I wasn't going to let him see me broken. I was done being the victim. He came in through the front door, his usual tired expression on his face. But when he saw me standing there waiting for him, something changed in his eyes. He knew. He knew I had seen everything. "Evelyn," he said, his voice tentative, "we need to talk. I agree, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing in my chest. We need to talk. He walked into the living room and sat down on the couch, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I stayed standing, my arms crossed, my gaze fixed on him. I wasn't going to sit down and make this easier for him. He had made his choice, and now I was going to make mine. I'm sorry, he started, his voice low, but there was no real emotion in it. No real apology. I never meant for this to happen. Then why did it happen? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did you let it happen, Thomas? How could you do this to me? After everything we've been through. I don't know, he said, his voice cracking a little. I don't know what went wrong. We've just grown apart. You've been so focused on your work, and I've been so caught up in mine. I didn't mean to hurt you. Then why her? Asked, my voice rising. Why Clara? Why her when you had everything you needed here? Why betray me like this? He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He just looked at me, helpless, as if he were trying to find a way to explain the unexplainable. You've been living a double life, Thomas, I continued, my voice cold, but my heart was pounding in my chest. You've been lying to me for months, maybe even years. And I've been standing here, playing the fool. I've been pretending that everything was okay when it was falling apart right in front of me. Evelyn, I don't know what to say, he said, his voice pleading. I'm sorry. I've made a huge mistake. Yeah, you have, I said, cutting him off. But I'm done, Thomas. I'm done pretending. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I turned and walked out of the room, not giving him a chance to respond. I couldn't stay there any longer, listening to his empty apologies. I needed to think. I needed space to figure out what I was going to do next. I spent the rest of the evening in the guest room, the room that had once been a sanctuary, but now felt cold and foreign. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall, lost in thought. Or now? What was I supposed to do? I wasn't going to stay in this marriage, not like this. But I wasn't going to leave without a fight. Thomas had made his decision, but I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. I would get what I deserved. I would make sure of it. The next morning I made the call. I contacted a lawyer. I needed to know my options. I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. But it wasn't just the legal side of things that concerned me. It was the emotional toll this was taking on me. I had been the one to hold everything together for so long. But now it was time to focus on myself. I wasn't going to let Thomas's betrayal destroy me. I was stronger than that. As I sat there in the guest room, I realized something. This wasn't just about saving a marriage. It was about reclaiming my life. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The days that followed felt like a blur. I went through the motions, waking up, eating, pretending to be normal, while inside I was anything but. Every conversation with Thomas, every glance exchanged, was like a game of charades. He thought I didn't know. He thought he could go on pretending that everything was fine, that his betrayal was something we could sweep under the rug. But the rug had been lifted, and I could see the truth clearly now, staring me in the face. I could feel the weight of my decision settling in. The quiet storm brewing inside me, pushing me toward action. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this. I wasn't going to let Clara walk away with him. I had been a nurse for years. I knew how to help people, how to heal, how to keep calm in chaos. But what I was doing now was different. This wasn't about healing someone else. This was about healing myself, taking back the parts of me that had been buried under years of compromise, of putting my needs last. I started with small steps. I reached out to a therapist, someone I could talk to about everything that had been weighing on me. It wasn't easy to admit that I needed help, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. My life, my sense of self, had been shattered, and I needed to rebuild. The first session was tough. The therapist, Dr. Walsh, asked questions I didn't know how to answer. What did I want? What was I afraid of? Where did I see myself in a year? 2 years. It was hard to imagine anything beyond the pain, beyond the lies that had taken over my life. But as we talked, something inside me began to shift. I began to see a future that didn't include Thomas. A future where I was in control. A future where I could breathe again without the weight of his betrayal dragging me down. "You're going through a major life transition, Evelyn," Dr. Walsh said, her voice calm and steady. "It's okay to not have all the answers right now. But one thing is clear, you're stronger than you think." That was the first time I felt like I wasn't completely broken. I was still here. I was still standing. And that meant something. The next day I contacted the lawyer. I needed to know where I stood. I needed to understand the legal implications of everything that had happened, to know what my options were and how I could protect myself. The lawyer's office was in the heart of the city, tucked away in a nondescript building, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders just a little bit. We talked for hours, about divorce, about alimony, about the assets Thomas and I had accumulated over the years. The lawyer was kind but firm, reminding me that this wasn't about revenge. This was about securing my future. This was about protecting myself and my children. "You've been through a lot," the lawyer, Ms. Harper, said. "But you don't have to face this alone. We'll make sure your interests are protected. You've worked hard for everything you've built." Her words were a balm to my soul. They gave me permission to be strong, to be strategic. No more second-guessing myself. No more letting Thomas dictate my worth. When I got home that evening, Thomas was there, just like always. But the house felt different now. The air was thick with tension. I had made the call. I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life. And now I had to face him. He was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone, his face buried in his hands. For a moment, I wondered if he was actually regretting what he had done. But then I reminded myself. He had already shown me who he was. This wasn't about his remorse. This was about my future. "Evelyn," Thomas said, his voice tentative as I walked into the room. He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Can we talk?" "I'm done talking, Thomas," I said, my voice steady but firm. "We've talked enough. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine." His face fell. "Evelyn, I know I've messed up, but You don't get to apologize your way out of this," I cut him off. "You don't get to make me feel like I'm the one who's at fault. You've been lying to me for months, and I've had enough. I'm done being the woman who is invisible in her own marriage. I'm done being the one who gets overlooked and taken for granted." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. For so long I had tried to keep the peace, to keep the family together, to make everything work no matter what. But now it was time to stand up for myself. It was time to be the woman I had always been, the woman I had forgotten along the way. "I'm contacting a lawyer," I continued. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not asking for your understanding. I'm doing what's best for me. I'm going to take back what's mine. My dignity, my independence, my future." Thomas looked at me, a mixture of guilt and confusion in his eyes. But I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned and walked out of the room, my head held high. I wasn't going to let his tears or his pleas change my mind. I had made a decision, and for the first time in a long time I felt at peace with it. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings. I was meticulous, strategic. I wasn't going to leave any room for doubt, for manipulation, for Thomas to slip through the cracks like he always did. This wasn't just about the marriage anymore. This was about me taking control of my life. But as I sat in the lawyer's office, finalizing the details of our divorce, I realized something important. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I was going to rebuild not just my life but myself. And this time I was going to make sure I never lost sight of who I was again. The weeks that followed felt like a blur of emotions and decisions. I went through the motions, but it was like I was watching my own life unfold from a distance. There were moments when I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like a weight was being lifted off my shoulders. But there were also moments of deep pain, when I remembered the life I thought I had, the family I believed was solid, and the man I had loved for more than half my life. I never imagined I would be in this position, standing on the edge of a life I didn't recognize, trying to pick up the pieces of something that had been shattered so completely. But as the days passed, I began to realize something important. I had the power to choose what happened next. For the first time in a long time, I had control over my own destiny. Thomas thought he could control everything. He thought he could keep me in the dark, keep me quiet, while he lived his double life with Clara. But I wasn't going to be that woman anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who waited for answers that would never come. I wasn't going to be the one who stood by while my life was torn apart. I was done being passive in my own life. I had spoken to my lawyer, Ms. Harper, several times since that initial meeting. She had been helpful, guiding me through the legal aspects of the divorce, advising me on how to protect my assets and my rights. But the emotional toll was another story. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in the weight of it all, when the reality of what had happened, what Thomas had done, felt like too much to bear. But I couldn't afford to stay in that place. I couldn't afford to let my pain dictate my future. That morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. I had a plan. The divorce was moving forward, and though it was painful, it was necessary. I had filed the papers and served Thomas with the notice. He was shocked, of course. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I would just let things slide like I had for all these years. But this time I wasn't bluffing. I had been doing the hard work, the emotional labor, for far too long. Now it was his turn to face the consequences. As I drove to the coffee shop to meet Maya, my sister, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. Maya had been my rock through all of this. She was the one who had kept me grounded, who had encouraged me to fight back, who had given me the strength to walk away when I thought I couldn't. Maya was tough. She had always been the stronger one in our family, the one who didn't hesitate to stand up for herself, the one who always knew what to do. She had her own complicated relationship with men, but that was a different story for another time. Right now, she was my partner in this battle. We sat down at a small corner table in the quiet coffee shop, the morning sun streaming through the windows. Maya looked at me with a knowing expression. Her arms crossed over her chest. "So, how's it going?" she asked, her voice soft but with a hint of curiosity. "I filed," I said, taking a deep breath. "It's happening. The papers are served, and I'm moving forward. I can't keep living like this, Maya. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when I know it's not." Maya nodded. "You've got this, Ev. You're doing the right thing. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't let him take that from you." Her words were a lifeline. They reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't the only one who had to pick up the pieces of a shattered dream. Maya had been there too. She had lived through her own heartbreak, her own battles, and had come out stronger for it. "I'm scared though," I admitted, looking down at my coffee cup. "I'm scared of what comes next. What if I make a mistake? What if I'm making the wrong decision?" "You're not making a mistake," Maya said firmly. "You're taking control of your life, Ev. You're choosing yourself for once. You've spent 32 years taking care of everyone else. It's time for you to take care of you." I looked up at my sister, the woman who had always been my biggest supporter, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. She was right. I had spent my whole life putting others first, putting my marriage first, putting my family first. But now it was time to focus on myself. It was time to rebuild. After the coffee meeting with Maya, I went to the gym. I hadn't worked out in months. Every time I tried, I felt like I couldn't breathe. But today I needed to move. I needed to remind myself of the strength I had forgotten was there. The gym was a place where I could focus on nothing but myself, where I could push my body to its limits and forget, for just a little while, about the pain that had been consuming me. I ran on the treadmill, faster than I had in years, the rhythm of my feet pounding against the belt like a drumbeat, a reminder that I was still alive, that I could still feel, that I wasn't broken. By the time I finished my workout, I felt like a new person. My body was sore, but my mind was clearer. I was ready for whatever came next. When I got home, Thomas was sitting on the couch, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at me with a mix of fear and disbelief. I could see it in his eyes. He knew it was over. He knew that I was no longer the woman who would wait for him to come back, the woman who would silently accept his betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice steady. "We're done. I'm done, Thomas. You've had your chance. You had your time and you wasted it. But I'm not going to waste any more of mine." His lips trembled as if he wanted to say something, but the words never came. Instead, he just sat there, staring at me as if he had lost something more precious than he could comprehend. I walked past him, not looking back. I had said everything I needed to say. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. The days after my confrontation with Thomas passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings. I was running on adrenaline, the kind of raw energy that comes from making a life-altering decision. It wasn't easy, not by any means. But every day I felt a little lighter, a little stronger. I had never realized how much of myself I had given up over the years until I started to take it back. For 32 years I had been Christine, the wife, the mother, the nurse. I had been everything for everyone else, and now I was finally starting to be Evelyn again. Felt strange, but in a way it also felt like freedom. I could breathe deeply for the first time in months, maybe even years. I had filed for divorce, and while it was still in the early stages, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't turning back. The lawyer had advised me to remain calm, to keep everything civil for the sake of the divorce settlement, but there was a part of me that wanted to scream, to throw everything I could in Thomas's face. To remind him of the life we had built and how easily he had torn it apart. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I wasn't going to let my anger control me. I was going to control my own narrative. I was going to move forward, not as a victim of his betrayal, but as a woman who was reclaiming her life. And the first step in that journey was learning to trust myself again. I took up hobbies I had abandoned long ago. Painting, reading, walking in the park. Simple things, but they were enough to remind me that I was still whole, still capable of finding joy in the small moments. I had always loved art, but somewhere along the way I had stopped making time for it. Now, with a fresh start ahead of me, I found myself picking up brushes again, dipping them in paint and losing myself in the colors. The art was my therapy. It wasn't just about filling time. It was about finding myself again. For years, I had sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of everyone else's. Now I was learning how to prioritize me, how to take care of my own needs. But there were hard moments. Late at night when the house was quiet, I would find myself thinking about Thomas, about the life we had once shared, about the family we had built. There were times when I missed the man I had fallen in love with, the man I had trusted with my whole heart. But then I would remember the man he had become, the man who had betrayed me, who had chosen another woman over me. That was the man I had to leave behind. And the truth was, I didn't miss him. Not really. I started reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some of them had been there for me during the early years of my marriage, before Thomas had become so distant. They were happy to hear from me, and each conversation, each reconnection, was like a reminder that there was still a world outside of my marriage. A world that I had shut myself out of for far too long. One evening I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. She was an old friend from nursing school, someone I hadn't seen in ages. She spotted me from across the aisle and walked over, her eyes wide with surprise. "Evelyn, is that you?" I smiled, genuinely surprised and pleased to see her. It had been years since we'd last spoken. We had both gotten caught up in life, Rachel with her family and career, and me with Thomas and the kids. "Rachel, it's been forever," I exclaimed, giving her a warm hug. "I didn't expect to see you here." She laughed, pulling back to look at me. "I know, I can't believe it either. How are you? I've been hearing things. People are saying you and Thomas are having some issues." I nodded, a little taken aback by how quickly the topic had come up. "Yeah, things have been complicated." Rachel's eyes softened with concern. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I know how hard you work to make things work with Thomas. But you're a strong woman. I know you'll get through this." Her words, though simple, meant a lot. Rachel had known me when I was at my most vulnerable, back in the days when I was just starting out in my career and still learning what it meant to be a wife, a mother, and a woman with dreams of her own. She was a reminder of the woman I used to be, the woman I was becoming again. "I'm getting there," I said, smiling more confidently now. "But it's going to take time." She nodded. "You don't have to go through this alone, you know. If you ever want to talk or just need someone to hang out with, you've got me. And I'm sure the other girls would love to catch up with you too. We've missed you." I felt a sense of warmth spread through me. It had been so long since I had truly felt like I had a support system. I hadn't realized how isolated I had become until now. But Rachel was right. I wasn't alone. "I'd love that," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Let's plan something soon." We exchanged numbers and parted ways, but as I left the grocery store, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to thrive. I was taking the pieces of my life that had been shattered, and I was putting them back together, one by one. That night, I spent a few hours painting in the living room, lost in the colors on the canvas. The brush strokes were like therapy, each one helping to heal the part of me that had been broken by betrayal. And when I finished, I stood back and admired the piece. It was abstract, chaotic, but beautiful in its own way. By me. I had survived the worst of it. I had faced the darkest part of my life and come out the other side stronger, more determined. And now, it was time to build the life I had always dreamed of. A life where I was in control, where I was free to be the woman I was always meant to be. Thomas had made his choices. He had lost me. But I was just beginning to find myself. The days felt different now. Each one was an opportunity, a chance to carve out something new from the chaos Thomas had left behind. I no longer waited for his calls, no longer wondered where he was or what he was doing. I had taken control, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was breathing with purpose again. Kept painting. It was a release, a way for me to express everything I had been holding inside. Each stroke of the brush was an act of defiance. It was me saying, I will not be defined by what happened. I will define myself. But it wasn't just the art that kept me going. It was the small victories I experienced each day. Every moment I spent doing something for myself, every time I took a step toward reclaiming my life, it made the sting of betrayal hurt a little less. I was learning to find joy in the little things again. I had forgotten what it felt like to simply live for me, without the constant pressure of making everyone else happy. I started exercising regularly, waking up early to go for long walks in the park. I hadn't realized how much I missed the fresh air, the quiet of the morning, or just being in my own thoughts. It was during those walks that I did my best thinking, my mind swirling with new possibilities, new paths to explore. One morning, as I was walking along the path by the lake, I ran into an old colleague from the hospital, Sarah. She was a nurse I had worked with years ago, but we had lost touch when she moved to another unit. She was jogging, her face flushed from the effort, but when she saw me, she slowed down and waved. "Evelyn! Wow, it's been so long. How have you been?" Her energy was infectious, and for a moment I couldn't help but smile. "I've been better," I said. "But I'm getting there. Just taking things one day at a time." "That's all we can do," she replied, falling into step beside me. "What's been going on?" "I've heard a few things, but I didn't want to pry." "I'm getting a divorce," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It was still strange to say, but it felt empowering, like a weight was lifting off my chest every time I spoke the truth. "Wow, I didn't know. I'm really sorry, Evelyn. But I have to say, you're stronger than you know. You've always been one of the most capable nurses I know, always holding it together even when things were tough. I'm sure you'll handle this too." Her words were comforting, but there was something else in them, something that struck a chord deep inside me. She didn't just see me as a nurse, as a mother, as a wife. She saw me as a woman who was capable of more than just surviving. She saw me as someone who could thrive. "I'm trying," I said, feeling the emotions I had been suppressing well up inside me. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'm done being anyone's second choice. I'm done letting my life be defined by someone else's actions. I'm finally doing this for me. Sarah gave me a knowing look, as though she understood more than I had said. She placed a hand on my arm, a reassuring gesture. You're going to be okay. And if you need help with anything or even just someone to talk to, I'm here. I know how hard it is, but I also know you have the strength to come out of this even stronger. Her words meant more than I could express. It had been so long since I had felt truly seen, truly understood. She was right. This wasn't just about the divorce. This was about rediscovering who I was. Who I had been before Thomas, before the kids, before the world had slowly carved away at my identity. I'll take you up on that, I said, smiling. It's been a while since I've had a good conversation, one that's not centered around him. We made plans to meet for lunch the following week, and I felt lighter as I walked back home. It wasn't just the physical act of walking that lifted my spirits. It was the realization that I was starting to reconnect with the world, with people who saw me as more than just a wife or a mother. I was starting to see myself again. New path. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old resume and started working on it. I had been a nurse for most of my life, but I realized that my job had always been secondary to my role at home. I had let my career take a back seat to Thomas's ambitions, to my family's needs, to everyone else's priorities. But now I was taking my future into my own hands. I began to research job openings, looking at positions that could challenge me in ways I hadn't been challenged in a long time. I wasn't just looking for any job. I was looking for something that would reignite the passion I once had for my work. I wanted a position that would allow me to grow, to learn, and to prove to myself that I was more than just the woman behind the scenes. As I updated my resume, I thought about the possibilities. There were positions in management, leadership roles I had never considered before. I had always been content to let others take the lead, but now I felt like I was ready to take charge. The more I thought about it, the more excited I became. This wasn't just about finding a job, it was about creating a new identity for myself. A version of me that wasn't defined by my marriage, by my past, or by anyone else's expectations. By the time I was finished updating my resume, I felt a sense of pride in what I had accomplished. I had taken the first step toward rebuilding my life, and no one, not even Thomas, could take that away from me. Breaking the news. The next day, I met with my lawyer again to finalize some details about the divorce. The paperwork was moving forward, and I could feel the weight of the decision settling in, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. When I got home, I found Thomas sitting at the kitchen table. His face strained with tension. I could see that he was waiting for me, probably hoping for some sign that I would back down, that I would change my mind. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. Evelyn, we need to talk, he said, standing up when I walked in. His voice was soft, but I could hear the desperation in it. We've talked enough, Thomas, I said, my voice firm. I'm moving forward with the divorce. I've already spoken to the lawyer. I'm done trying to fix something that's broken beyond repair. I looked down at my hands, the weight of her words sinking in. Maya was right. I had been building up to this for a long time. I had spent years defining myself through the roles I played for other people, wife, mother, caretaker. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was defining myself on my own terms. The calm before the storm. That evening, after our conversation, I went home to an empty house. Thomas was out, likely staying at Clara's apartment or doing whatever it was he was doing now that his world had been turned upside down. I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for him anymore. It wasn't about him anymore. I had gotten used to the silence. But tonight, the house felt quieter than usual. The space that once seemed filled with the noise of family life was now empty, and it had become a space where I could hear my thoughts clearly, without the distraction of anyone else's needs. It was a space I had fought for and earned. I made dinner for myself, something simple, something that didn't require much thought. But as I ate, I couldn't help but think about the life I was building outside of this marriage. It was strange. It felt like starting over, but at the same time, it felt like finding the version of myself that had been lost along the way. The final step. A few days later, I received the call I had been waiting for. The healthcare consulting firm wanted to move forward with an interview. They were impressed with my experience and wanted to know more about my vision for the future of healthcare management. I immediately scheduled the interview, and when the day arrived, I dressed with purpose. The woman I saw in the mirror was no longer the woman who had spent 32 years catering to the needs of others. She was someone who was reclaiming her place in the world, who was stepping forward with confidence and intention. The interview went well. It wasn't easy. It required me to push myself to talk about things I had long buried, but I could feel something inside me shifting as I spoke. For the first time I was talking about me. Not the roles I played for others, but who I was in my own right. It was exhilarating. A few days later I received the job offer. The position was mine. The pay was better than I had expected, and the work was exactly what I had been looking for. The call came while I was sitting at the kitchen table, my heart racing. I couldn't help but smile as I listened to the offer. The man on the other end of the line congratulated me, but it felt like more than just a job offer. It felt like the first piece of my new life falling into place. New dawn. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, my mind racing with possibilities. This wasn't just about a new job. This was about a new chapter in my life. As I looked out the window, the sun was setting on another day, one I had almost let pass me by, before I realized I was the one who could shape my future. No one else. Not Thomas, not Clara. Just me. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future. Hope for the woman I was becoming. And hope for the life I was finally starting to live on my own terms. The air was different now. It was lighter, more expansive, like the first breath of spring after a long, suffocating winter. The weight of uncertainty had been replaced with the clarity of knowing who I was and what I wanted. I was no longer just the woman who had been betrayed. I was Evelyn, strong, capable, and fully in control of her future. It had taken time, more time than I had ever imagined, but I was finally where I needed to be. The divorce was final. The job was mine. The house, though still echoing with the remnants of the past, felt like mine now. I was the one who set the pace. I was the one who made the choices. For so long I had let my identity be shaped by others. By Thomas, by my children, by the expectations placed on me as a wife, a mother, a nurse. But now I was free. Free to live my life on my own terms. Free to pursue my own dreams, my own desires, and my own happiness. I had spent so many years in a relationship where I felt unseen, unheard. But now I was finally seeing myself, and the reflection in the mirror was something I could be proud of. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest. It was as though I was walking through a fog, trying to remember who I had been before I was Evelyn, wife and mother. But every step forward, every small victory, brought me closer to the woman I was becoming. I took on the new job with energy and enthusiasm, the kind of passion I had long forgotten existed within me. The work was challenging, but I loved every second of it. I was finally in a role that demanded my expertise, my knowledge, and my leadership. I was no longer just the woman in the background, waiting for permission to succeed. I was stepping up, taking charge, and proving to myself that I was more than capable. The new path. A few months passed, and the landscape of my life was almost unrecognizable. The pain of the past was still there, but it had faded into the background, like an old scar that had healed. The wounds were still visible, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were just part of my story now. I had grown closer to my children too. Marcus and Jasmine had their own lives, their own responsibilities, but they had been my constant throughout this journey. I had worked hard to make sure that, despite everything, they knew I was still their mother, still the woman who would always be there for them. As we sat around the dinner table one night, laughing over old memories and new jokes, I realized something. I had come full circle. I wasn't just healing for myself anymore. I was healing for them too. I wanted to show them what it looked like to live a life of integrity, to stand up for yourself, and to pursue happiness no matter the cost. "You're different, Mom," Jasmine said one evening, looking at me with a curious expression. "You're happy." I smiled, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. "I am, sweetie. I really am." And it was true. For the first time in a long time, I was living a life that was true to me. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Forgiveness, but not for him. One night, months after the divorce, I received a message from Thomas. It wasn't the first time he had tried to contact me since the split, but something in the way he worded this message made me stop. "I miss you," he said. "I've made so many mistakes. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm sorry for everything." For a moment, I felt a rush of old emotions: anger, sadness, regret. But they didn't last long. They were just ghosts of the past, trying to pull me back into a life I had already left behind. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the woman I had been, the woman who would have read that message and rushed to respond, to try to fix things, to try to make things right. But the woman I had become, the woman I was now, didn't need to fix anything with Thomas. I had spent so many years trying to fix things for others. Now I was fixing myself. I didn't respond to his message. I didn't need to. I had already forgiven him, not for his sake, but for mine. I forgave him because holding on to that anger was only keeping me tied to a past I no longer wanted. Forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about me. And I was free. The future is mine. As the months passed, I continued to grow. I took up new hobbies, traveled when I could, and allowed myself to enjoy life without the weight of guilt or shame hanging over me. I was no longer a woman defined by her marriage, by her past mistakes, or by the expectations others placed on her. One afternoon, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the city below, I felt a sense of pride I had never felt before. I had done this. I had built this life with my own hands. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over everything, and I thought about how far I had come. It felt like the start of something new, a new chapter in my life that was completely mine to write. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited for the future. I didn't know what it would bring, but I knew one thing for sure: I was ready. I had taken the steps, faced the pain, and emerged stronger. The woman I was today was the woman I had always been meant to be. And the world, it was mine for the taking. Epilogue. The phone rang one evening while I was finishing a painting, lost in the flow of creativity. I answered it without thinking, expecting it to be the office, but instead it was a familiar voice. "Evelyn." It was Rachel. She was calling to invite me to a gallery showing in the city. She had seen some of my recent artwork online and wanted to feature it in her upcoming exhibit. I smiled as I listened to her excited voice. It was another reminder of how far I had come, how much I had changed. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'd love to." And in that moment, I realized that this was just the beginning. My journey wasn't over. I was just getting started. The future was bright, and it was mine to create.